Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co., and this is a first impressions video of the Isofarian Guard. And if you've followed the channel, I've done a bunch of first impressions videos recently, although I generally do them when I don't feel I've experienced enough of the game, enough of the content to call it a full review. And even though I'm around 5 hours into the Isofarian Guard, I've barely scratched the surface. And for context, actually, if I'm around 5 hours in and I am over here, then that's I'm roughly a quarter of the way through the first campaign out of 5 campaigns, which if you do the math and if it all expands outwards like that, that's roughly 100 hours of content. Not that you need to go through it all at all. In fact, it's broken up into character journeys, so you can have different character journeys as you go through picking 2 characters and going through the game. Now, I'm doing this video now because the Pledge Manager closes in a few days. If you want to get in on this game now, this is the, last chance to get it now before you have to wait till retail, pay retail prices, pay aftermarket prices, all of that. So I am doing this video now for a reason. Link in the description down below to the Pledge Manager, all that. Like I said already, it closes in a few days, so if you're interested in this game, you should be acting now. But as far as the game, let's go ahead into a general overview, covering the highs, the lows, different things I've experienced along the way, and my general thoughts of the game so far. There's a lot of good, there's some bad, and we'll get into all of it. To start off with, let's go with a general overview of the game, what the Isofarian Guard is. And the Isofarian Guard is a narrative-heavy journey game with the bag building, chip building as you develop and as you go through different combats in the game, all while unlocking the story, building up your characters, unlocking new zones, figuring out ways to interact with the world around you. It effectively is a narrative slash combat-based experience. Now in the game, you'll have 8 different characters, but you go into each journey carrying 2 of those characters at a time. So you have 2 characters at a time, you'll have their 2 mats, and you go through the journey. So you have different narrative arcs, different story arcs, different campaign and combat arcs, because they're very different in the way the characters play as you go through each game. And then you'll be faced off with some final boss fight campaign. I don't know the exact details of that one because I haven't touched that at all. But overall, that's what you're doing in this game. It's a 1 to 2 player experience. One player will be controlling both characters if you're playing it solo, or you can play it as 2 players. It's not really meant as a 3+ player experience. The game comes with a foreteller app with the foreteller narrative, and it's the best foreteller narrative I've heard so far. It's the best foreteller narrative I've heard to date, with sound effects and audio and voice acting, and it really pulls you into the journey. This is the only game that I have ever sat back as I hit a story point and just sit back with my eyes closed, pull out the foreteller app, and just hit go. Again, I have a gameplay over my channel. You can go ahead and check it out and see and get a feel and taste for what that feels like. It is a break to the gameplay. Although if you don't like that, you could just read through the book itself. You will lose some of the flavor, some of the feeling, and again, I'm not always a narrative heavy person, but this one really is a narrative-focused experience, although not at the cost of the combat and RPG elements of the game. With that general idea of what the game is, let's go into, first of all, my biases, and then general thoughts, impressions, all that. And when I say biases, I mean the things I like and don't like in games, as well as Sky Kingdom games as well. So, I love powers and abilities, and the Isofarian Guard will give you that. I've had mixed experiences on heavily narrative-focused games. Some I have really enjoyed, some not so much, so I'm very mixed on that. And then particularly, I do have a hard time committing to campaign games. I play a lot of games, and the way I tend to focus on games, I get them out, I set them up, and then I go through as much as possible, but then the next time I put it away, I have that mental aspect of trying to remember what I was doing, where I was up to. Has it been 2 weeks since I played last, or has it been 3 months? And it's much harder to dive back in. So campaign games, while I really love what they offer, rarely do I finish them to completion. And then finally, I do have a full video saying why I did not back this game, why I did not back the Isofarian Guard back when it was on Kickstarter. And part of that was my bias towards my belief that it was more of a narrative-focused experience, which, while great, wasn't what I wanted to sign up for. And I was concerned that the chip-based combat didn't have the depth that I wanted out of the mechanic aspect of the game. And then lastly, Sky Kingdom Games did come down and spend the whole day hanging out with myself and Quacklope, teaching us the game, going through the experience, and so they did have that very much one-to-one direct interaction with us. From that, let's go into the various aspects of the game, covering different points of how I feel about different aspects, starting with the art and components and theme, narrative, all of that. And that part's straight up knocking it out of the park. Obviously, taste will differ. The good news is you can see most of it in front of you, or you can see it over the campaign page. Art-wise, the game hasn't changed at all. Mechanic-wise, it's changed a lot. since the Kickstarter page, but the art direction, the theme, all of that's the same. The foreteller apps, the bits that you've heard, that quality seems to go through every single story that I've heard so far. Every single narrative breakpoint has the same audio quality as the parts that they highlighted on the campaign page. This is not something where they showed us the best part of it and then the rest kind of was just secondary. So art, components, theme, all of that's completely knocking it out of the park. And like I said already, this is a game where when I get to an audio break, when I get to a narrative break, I sit back, close my eyes, hit play. I specifically sync it to my various devices in the house, in the basement around me, so that I can get that full surround sound audio and just enjoy the experience. Headphones will work too. You don't need a surround sound system. But in general, it really does pull you into the story, the narrative of what's going on in the world of... I should know the name of this place. The world of No, I can't remember the name of this place. But in the Isofarian Guard. In any case, that is art and components. Ease of play. Ease of play. This is a tougher one because ease of play is a little bit of a mixed bag. So first of all, this is a game that is very easy to teach people. I can get you up and running in the game in a matter of minutes. There's not a lot to teach others. You can get them going very, very quickly. The bad news is you do have to go through around 55 pages of rules to get there. At least right now, obviously, prototype, this stuff is still very... It's past the prototype phase in terms of the fact that everything's being iterated upon. This is a pre-production copy, and so it is very much closer to being a final game, but things are still subject to change. Rules are still being developed, and so the rulebook does have a lot of content, and I think it has too much content in a weird way. The rules for the game, for the most part, are fairly streamlined. You can get things up. In fact, they have these player aids. In fact, they only have three of them for the other players. 3 player aids will cover most of what you need to know to go through the game. Like I said already, I can get you up and running in a matter of minutes. But there are a lot of edge cases to know about. There's a lot of different exceptions, a lot of interactions, rules, things, small little stuff that you have to know. So for you yourself, you may have to go through a 55-page rulebook. Pretty easy to read, but still 55 pages. Teaching others, that is very easy to get them up and running. Although the flip side, in terms of ease of play, like I said already, it is a campaign game. This means that you have to be someone who can make your way through campaign games, or you will not be getting the most out of the Isofarian Guard. And then lastly is table space. Table space is very, very big on this one, and in a bad way. I'm someone who has a decent sized table, and you can see how I'm literally covering up half the map in order to have this all fit on the space that I'm playing on over here. If you're playing it solo especially, you don't even have the benefit of having someone else being able to reach across, handle the other enemy or whatever it is. And so this does take up a lot of table space. Now it's worth noting, this map over here, which comes both with a board as well as with a neoprene playmat, the map is available in a smaller, more condensed form in the back of the rulebook or something like that. I don't remember exactly how they're handling it, but it doesn't necessarily need to be on your table. For those who have the table space, for those who want that more feeling of immersion as you wander around the world, so you don't feel it's just combat to combat, but rather you feel like you're traveling, especially with some of these amazing miniatures over here. Yours do not come pre-painted. That table space is something to keep in mind. Again, they have ways around it, but that would turn it to just having these character battles on the board and then having a back of a rule book or something like that. It's something that I kind of hope that they develop some sort of app, or someone develops an app so you can track your progress through the world without taking up the amount of table space that this map currently does. As far as player count, I've talked about this already. This is a 1 or 2 player game. It doesn't have a 3-player game. It's a 1 or 2 player experience, of which I've played it at both. I have primarily, I want to say, probably 3 or 4 of my hours in this game have been played solo. I went through maybe an hour and a half with Quackalope, where I went through 2 players, and I would say that I enjoyed both. I enjoy the interactions you have at 2 players as you try to figure out, should you go first, should I go first, do you have any cards that can help, what about this, do you think your card, no, you'll be able to give me more temporary stamina points, so action points, how do you want to handle that? So those things, those interactions do come up at 2 players, and I enjoy the experience. But I would say most of my time has been playing it solo. Solo has that more thinky vibe where you look at the board, you take into account, how do I want to handle this situation? And you just go through the thought process of trying to figure out, do I want to activate Radial Barrage over there? That could be the right time, but I don't know because they don't actually have. The stun will be a bit lost. Or should I go first with Covering Shot and Poison? You'll have that aspect, that thinkiness as you puzzle your way through a solo combat. So both of them I have enjoyed. Again, it's hard to say which one I've enjoyed more. Solo has the greater accessibility. 2-player has a little bit more interaction going on. Which brings us to the highlights, nitpicks, and meaningful critiques. Things that I enjoyed, things that are worth knowing about, and things that take away from the experience for me. As far as highlights, first of all, I'll talk about the thing that I was most concerned about when I originally looked at the Isofarian Guard, the reason I did not back it in the first place, which is the combat. the combat, and to be fair to myself, the combat has very much changed from what was presented on the Kickstarter page. So don't get me wrong, I have been wrong plenty of times in videos before. I will be wrong again. In this case, the judgment call I made based off of what was shown to backers is very different than the final experience I have on the table in front of me. And that's relevant especially if you are someone who looked at the Isofarian Guard and passed it by. I really enjoy the combat in this game. I don't know where it stacks in terms of complexity, in terms of weighing it up against Too Many Bones, against Gloomhaven, or any of those combat systems. I would argue it's less than that, but it is meaningful. There are choices to be made as you go through combat, and I don't even mean the process of building out your bag. I was concerned that the only choices you really have is how you build out your bag as you go through the game. And you still have that choice. This still is an RPG element with gear, equipment, with stats that you boost, with various upgrades you have. Each character has their own set of powers and abilities that they utilize. Each character has a unique flow to the way they play the game, the way their cards work. And you'll have to make choices. Which special cards do you want? Which of their default cards do you want? How are you going to combine all these options? Which first you have to unlock them. But even once you unlock them, you have to choose what do you want in combat at any given point. Which abilities do you think will pair off well based on what you're currently handling? Those puzzles are absolutely present. But I was worried the combat itself would just be, okay, now we just pull chips from the bag and get to the experience. And it doesn't have that. The pulling chips from the bag often does have meaningful choice in terms of what cards you activate, how you build your bag, because many of these cards will involve temporary bag building as you go through the game. Adding chips to your bag that don't represent a permanent addition, but rather represent chips that will come out one time. But how they come out, where they come out, how you want to load and structure your bag, when you want your bag empty so you can cycle to the next round, those are a lot of choices. Which enemies you target, how you combine, which characters go first or not. There are a lot of choices to be made in combat, more than I thought would be present based on my understanding of the game system. And again, I focused on this briefly already, but the powers and abilities, the variableness of the characters is 100% present. For those who know the campaign well, or the game well, I should say that yes, I have mostly been going through the game in a linear fashion, progressing as one would through the experience. But in order to get a taste of the game, I also have tried some of the other characters and temporarily buffed them up. I reached out to Sky Kingdom Games. I got a suggested build for a higher level combat with 2 other characters, just so I could get a taste of not just Grigory and Alec, but also Vera and Karzan over here. So I can get a feel and a taste for what a higher level combat brings to the table, for what other characters bring to the table. Because sure, Grigory and Alec play out as 2 totally different experiences. Totally different. They feel completely changed in the way they interact and their strengths and their weaknesses and what they bring to combat or battle or your troop in general. But I want to see, but what about Vera and Karzan? What do they do? What do they bring? And so I have some of their cards, some of their things, and I've gone through a battle with them as well. And that's only half the roster. There's still 4 other characters. I haven't even looked at their cards yet, and those all represent new mechanics to the way they bring things to battle, new sets of cards, new sets of abilities, and a new puzzle as far as how you're going to build them out, how you're going to build out their stats, their gear, their equipment. There's a lot of content in this game. There's a lot of powers and abilities. There's a lot of nuance and impressiveness to the combat. And then lastly, as far as highlights, I talked about this already doing the theme aspect, and I'll talk about it again. The story is incredibly well done. Now, I don't know if the story is an incredible story. I haven't gotten far enough into it to know, but it's pulling me in. The narrative aspect, the foreteller aspect, the quality to which it's done is 100% pulling me into the story, pulling me into the choices, and there are choices you'll make. I don't know the long-term ramifications of those choices, so I can't comment on that. But the choices you make, there are decisions as far as how you're going to interact with a given tree, given a narrative tree or whatever it is. Will you do this or will you do that? And they will involve skipping other story elements because you've made a choice. Again, I can't speak for the long-term ramifications, but in the short term, there's certainly short-term ramifications in the game. Those are the highlights I have for the game so far. As far as nitpicks, these are just things that are worth knowing about. But first of all, rules-wise, I touched upon this briefly already. It's a weird situation where you can kind of learn 95% of the game from just walking into the campaign, following the setup, and then having these play rates. That will be 95% of what you need to know. The other 5% is buried in those 55 pages of rules. Now, I have talked to Sky Kingdom Games about this already, and I've suggested, and I think they're trying to, but no guarantees, I think they're trying to incorporate, my suggestion is basically, don't have it so that you have to read a 55-page rulebook when 95% of it you can skip. Rather have it that when you go through this actual campaign book, when you get up to something that talks about combat, it says, and read pages 42 to 44 in the rulebook. I've seen this done in other games. Assassin's Creed is a good example of it. Assassin's Creed is a game where I've gone through more than half the campaign, and I still haven't read the rulebook back to back. The Isofarian Guard, I had to both start the game off and then read 55 pages of rules to cover all the things I missed. So that's something that I'd love to see improved upon, and I believe it can be. Again, to their credit, 95% of the experience you can get from going through the campaign and the player A's. Secondly, the sheer size of everything. I talked about this again in the accessibility, but the sheer size of everything, I feel like everything is bigger than it needs to be. Now, that will be something that many people will like, because it offers that degree of scale of just this. I mean, these things are not condensed. But they could have had smaller cars, they could have had more condensed boards, they could have made everything just a drop smaller. These cubes and these player inserts and everything did not have to be as large as they are. They will add to your experience if you're someone who, well, wants that kind of immersiveness on the table, but to those who don't have the table space, it's a bit of a con there. So that's also worth noting there. And then lastly, there are some upgrades that just aren't fun. As you go through these various books over here, there's 3 different books we have right now, and as you go through these various things to upgrade your characters have different upgrade paths that they can slowly upgrade different things, getting different abilities, getting different chips, and some of the upgrades just aren't that fun. Sometimes you earn enough lux to go ahead. Sil is the currency, lux is the energy or whatever. You'll earn enough lux to upgrade something, and you'll pick something, and it's just a boring chip. So the good news is the game has enough combats that you are earning enough lux that you will get those fun upgrades as well. But I don't love it in games when it's like, that upgrade just not that interesting, but I have to do it to get to the next upgrade. I have to do it to get along the pathway. As far as meaningful critiques, this is the section of things so far that have detracted from my experience, have taken away from the game, from the way the game has worked out for me so far. And first of all is the potential for not fun combats. Now, this is something I've talked about with Sky Kingdom games, and it's something that I don't yet know how deep it is. It's only happened to me one time, and for me, I just house ruled past it, but it can happen. Where there's different kinds of difficulties in games. So this game does have difficult fights. It has many, many fights that you can get past, and you're fine, and you'll win, you'll go through that. But there are times where you will have to retreat from combat if you want to survive. There are times where you might die and have to respawn at a save point, and I like difficulty. I like the fact that that means that when I go out again and I fight that level 3 Tenebris Clayhorn, when I do that for the second time and I actually win the second time round, I like the feeling of accomplishment it gives me, knowing that I was defeated, I leveled up, I reapproached things, I tried a different strategy, and I won. So I like difficulty. That's not my concern at all. But some of the difficulty in Isofarian Guard comes through the sense of things that aren't fun. Comes through chips that enter your bag that stop you from doing things. I don't care if you kill me. I don't care if you reduce my health to 0. But if you put chips in my bag that permanently stay in my bag until I get rid of them, and then I'm just going through a cycle of not being able to activate my abilities, not being able to do anything, that feels stifling. I don't appreciate stifling quite as much. Now again, you can get rid of these things. You can go through that, you can get those chips, you can wander off somewhere else, you can improve stuff, but it's certainly not my favorite way of approaching difficulty in games, having not an issue of strength versus not strength, of winning versus losing, but rather an issue of you're just tying me to the floor and I'm unable to do anything, and now I have to retreat back 4 nodes on the map to go somewhere else and then actually heal. I don't love that aspect of the combat and of the engagement in this world. And then secondly is the potential grind. And this ties in a little bit to the first part, but the game does have some degree of grind. As you wander around this map, as you wander around this universe, you'll be going from node to node, having different encounters, different combats. And the amount of combats you can have between different story points, the amount of combats you can have between leveling up, between interacting with that next narrative journey, sometimes it's a greater number than I'd like. And I don't have a firm fixed answer, but in my head I want it to be like, 2 or 3 combats before the next thing that changes, before the next escalation in the game. It doesn't always have to be a new chip, it doesn't always have to be a new level up card, whatever it is. Sometimes it could just be a narrative story point. And then sometimes I just find that it ends up being closer to 4 or 5 combats instead, and so it has potentially a drop more grind than I'm looking for. The good news is that adds to your playtime, because it makes this potentially a 100-hour journey, or potentially more, I don't know how far this goes. The bad news is for those who don't want that grind, it's introducing a little bit more grind than I would potentially like. Again, this is a weird one because I'm 4 or 5 hours in so far. It's entirely possible that those gaps close the more you level up, the more you do things, and I don't have that answer. I am merely talking about my first 5 hours in this game, which could entirely have a little bit more combat spread out. The gaps vary. Sometimes it's 3 or 4 combats, sometimes it's 2 or 3 combats, but more often than not, it's been a drop more than I'm looking for as far as the grind of the experience. that's basically where I am with Isofarian Guard. As far as final thoughts with this, I've really been enjoying the Isofarian Guard so far. At the end of the day, the biggest thing that has me questioning long-term, I'm still playing this game, this is still a game I'll be diving into again, the long-term ramifications for this game, whether it stays in my collection, whether it doesn't, and where it ends up for me, really do come down to that campaign aspect, potentially tying into the grind as well. 100 hours of campaign may sound incredibly tempting to some people. And to me, it sounds almost like a commitment, just because, again, I tend to play a lot of games as opposed to going deep into games. I don't imagine I would ever finish 100 hours of the Isofarian Guard. I imagine that I can potentially finish the 20 hours of a single character journey, and then choose whether or how I want to approach the next one in the system. It's a game that really did impress me in terms of the mechanics of the game compared to what I thought it was back when I looked at the Kickstarter. It's a game where the narrative pulls me in 100%. The combat and the escalation, every single battle is a new puzzle, and some of them feel easy. Some of them are just like, okay, chip, 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 boom, I killed you, great, I get some lux, I get some sil, awesome, I have my currencies, next thing on the map. Others feel like a challenge, and those are the ones that I like a lot more. I'd rather lose a combat and then come back and fight again than just win all of them easily. Although it is a mix, because going back to that grind aspect, sometimes you want to have a few quick battles so you can just level up, gather some stuff, and go to the next sequence. Other times you want that challenge, that time that you bit off a little more than you can chew, and then you question just how strong your character was, and next time you walk into the next combat being a little bit more wary of those level 3 engagements as you go through them. Overall, I'm really enjoying Isofarian Guard. Like I said already, this is currently available to late pledge. It's one that I'm enjoying. It's one that the campaign still has me uncertain for the long-term aspect of my collection, but at least in the meantime, I'm thoroughly enjoying my experience with it. Until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co., and I hope you have a good one.